Hi everyone, Catherine here from Inky Finger Cat, and I am back with a bit of a doubler. This is both a Make It Masculine and a Use Up My Magazine kit. So when I made my last magazine kit cards, I actually made this background too at the same time, but decided partway through the video that I would save it and do it as a Make It Masculine. So I'm sticking it in both playlists. Really, it's a Make It Masculine. So how did I do it? Well, I did it the same way as that last card that I did share, in terms of I made my own little masterboard, but I actually only used one half of the sheet. And I chose to emboss the leaf designs, all 4 leaf stamps at the same time, and just go all the way across the page and use my dark green embossing powder. So on the previous one I did flowers, and I did it with a white embossing powder. And this time I'm using the green, but I'm still going to use the brushos to then create the background. So that was me. Oh, I did just take one single leaf stamp to just fill in a few of the gaps where I was like, oh, there's a bit too much of a gap there. So you'll see I just filled that in with those little, with the single stamp. But it's really easy and quick, and you don't need to worry about being uniform or anything along those lines. In fact, it's better to kind of twist the stamp block around so you get in a different orientation on the stamps. And also, because I knew I was going to do a messy background to this, because I'm going to use my brushos, I wasn't so concerned if some of my embossing powder didn't stick properly, or if they became kind of a loose image, or there were some speckles around. Wasn't bothered. So really easy background to do. Now, what I didn't realise was I hadn't managed to capture every single leaf. There is one leaf that doesn't end up being captured, so that does come off. Again, doesn't really matter. It's absolutely fine. So I used a combination of both the emerald green and the leaf green. And I did spraying the cardstock first and then sprinkling the powders on, which allowed for some of the pigments to kind of separate and become kind of dotty and bitty. And then I used my paintbrush to just like move the ink around, or the pigment around. Now, because I put quite a lot on, it was a bit heavy and it went everywhere. And then I just set that to one side to dry. Now, this is now several days later, and I've chosen to do a square panel. And at first I cut it to, I think it was 5 1/4 inch. I do end up cutting it down to 5. I cut it to 5.5 inch, and then I cut it down to 5 1/4 inch. And I decided at this point I was only going to do the one card for my Make It Masculine. I wasn't in the mood, and I didn't have a huge amount of time to do this card, but I just wanted to get a bit creative and start to clear the desk. Couldn't do it until I'd sorted this out. So I have chosen 2 sentiments, and I'm just stamping them all around the page. One in the, what's it called? Tranquil Tide, and the other one using the Distress Inks in the Vintage Photo, which is my favourite go-to brown for pretty much everything. And then I did some speckles, and then this little piece that's off cut, I just decided to colour a few of them with the brown, and then I'm going to cut out all these leaf shapes, and I use all but one. So even though they are stamped off the corner, off the sides, and some of them aren't complete images, you can still use them. And I'm going to do my fairly common technique that I do, and that is to create a cluster around a sentiment. That's the design that I'm going for. So it's one large background panel, and then I'll create a cluster using some of the papers from that magazine kit. And this is where I've cut that down too small, so I have to then cut down my panel. But that's fine. It works nicely on the card blank when I come to it. And I'm umming and ahhing as to whether to use those offcuts across the page or not. I did decide it needed a bit of a framing though, so I'm just rubbing the ink pad across the edge of the panels just to create a little bit of a darker edge. Now, because this is quite warped, this cardstock, it's not too bad. It probably would have helped if I'd have flattened it in the time that it's been sitting on my desk, but I didn't. Just left it sat on the desk. So yeah, it did need a little bit more of the wet glue and the red tape, just to make sure it really adheres to that piece of pattern paper that's going to be the mat. And then I was going to use the pattern paper to create the cluster area. I decided though just to use it for that banner and not the circle. Originally I was going to use it for both, and then I decided no, because I was going to put all those leaves behind instead. Now, it is important when you're using quite a thin pattern paper, if you're going to do die cutting and things that you want to be quite sturdy, mount it on some cardstock. So I've just chosen some scrap cardstock. I'm actually going to die cut that banner a couple of times from the cardstock, the scrap cardstock, just to mount it up so it becomes quite a chunky embellishment on the top. People who have watched my videos before, I do quite like chunky when it comes to my embellishments. So I stack up die cuts just cut from scrap cardstock, so then it becomes quite a thick little banner there. So next I'm going to put some, again, that red line tape on the back, just so that I can pick up my little leaves and adhere them to the back of that banner. Because there's only a tiny amount of them hitting that red tape, it almost works like a temporary tape because there's very little of it. And so there's a bit of fiddling around, but then I make sure that I'm going to put plenty of glue on it before I put it down. But I realised I needed another layer between. And so I chose just a really simple rectangle of the mirrored cardstock. It's like a foiled cardstock in a kind of orangey bronzy colour. I just chose a simple little square of that, or rectangle of that, but I did shove it through the embossing folder just to give it some texture. It doesn't really matter that you're not getting the actual image that you can see on the embossing folder, which is like the fuchsias hanging down and the hummingbird. It's just a bit where the leaves are, and it just gives that bit of texture that really helps to then frame that cluster. I did put plenty of glue down because that embossing folder did actually sort of break up the foiled cardstock quite a lot. So I need to make sure that it was all glued down because it kind of ripped in places. Again, doesn't matter. It's just an element of texture behind it. Now I've disappeared off camera because I'm choosing a sentiment, and I've decided not to use a sentiment from the magazine kit. I think this is the first time we've gone for something very obviously outside of the card kit. I just decided to just use an Altenew one instead. I wanted something a bit different with a different font from the one that was in the kit that I've used in the background. I just wanted something different, and that yellow one was already done, stacked ahead of time when I've done a little die cutting session. So simple card. I hope you enjoyed that. Please do give thumbs up and leave comments below, and until next time, bye bye.